Thank you for coming to visit us at South Park City.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So the collection in South Park City includes over 60,000 artifacts. They come from all over South Park. They cover several different cultures. What we have here are what's left of the Chinese artifacts that we had from the miners in Fairplay. When the museum first opened in 1959, there was a building, which is the Homestead building, which was set up as a Tong house, a Chinese meeting house. Unfortunately, in the early 1960s, it was vandalized and most of the artifacts were stolen. So what we have left survives here, and you can see by the plate that was reassembled after it was destroyed in that incident.
I must say, it was good of you folks to salvage what you could and to place it here. And these are actually very fine pieces, I think, from the period. The Chinese community here was, once upon a time, a thriving community. Many of them lived in Fairplay, but also in nearby Hamilton. And many of them worked in nearby Como. They worked for the South Park Como Company, where they were recruited. And they worked in the coal mines alongside other workers, mainly Italian coal mine workers. The Italian miners were fearful that the Chinese miners were being brought in to eventually replace them. And consequently, that led to what the Rocky Mountain News referred to as the, Chinese-Italian War. On November 9th, 1879, the Italian miners basically accosted, if you will, the Chinese miners and told them they had to leave. But unfortunately, that wasn't the end of the anti-Chinese sentiment in the area. 14 years later, in 1893, the citizens of Como basically drove the Chinese out by burning, if you will, their homes and robbing them. One of the reasons why I find all of this significant is because what happened in 1879 was a prelude to the infamous anti-Chinese riot in Denver. This incident was actually one of many that had occurred in the American West. During the period of time in which we're talking about, there was an estimated over 200 instances in which the Chinese were driven out of their communities. Communities very much like the one in Fairplay and in Como. I think the record shows that the Chinese sought to be good citizens of the communities in which they lived. But because of the circumstances of the period, economic, they were often used as scapegoats to account for the troubles that others were experiencing. During this period of time, they had what they called the Chinese question. And that question was based on whether more Chinese should be allowed to enter the country to work alongside other immigrant workers in the United States. And people were fearful. They were fearful that they would lose their jobs to the Chinese because the Chinese were, for their own reasons, mainly to support their families, willing to work for less and to work hard. They were considered a very reliable workforce. And in addition to seeing them as an economic threat, they also viewed them in other ways that would be considered threatening. They thought that perhaps they were, carriers of exotic diseases. They looked different, and for that reason they developed, if you will, misconceptions about them. Well, in any case, this has been the experience of, the Chinese who were in this area, and it's been a part of a general pattern, not just the Chinese, but for other Asians who have come to Colorado, the West, and the United States. It's been, unfortunately, a recurring pattern where they've had to endure harassment, discrimination, and personal violence. Things were so bad that they would eventually be excluded from the country entirely as a result of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Yeah, there's a lot of history, a lot of history, and much of it can be found in places like Fair Play. So I'm delighted to be here to, look at your exhibit.
Well, thanks for coming.
Well, thank you very much for showing it to me.
Absolutely.